Welcome to Rauta's Underground Trio. Once again, we have three different bands, and this time I'm not gonna say it from three different parts of the world or even three different styles, because technically speaking, we have two black metal bands from Italy and one from Finland, and that is death thrash. So, two styles, two countries. That's pretty much what you need to know. First, alphabetically, then according to my own opinion, from worst to best. Luckily, this time we have quite good albums, so there are no bad ones, not even mediocrity. So let's go. First, let's set up these in alphabetical order. So first we have here Unholy Impurity with the new album, Oculus Mortis. Black metal from Italy. Then we have Unhoped, which is death thrash from Finland. Third album, Torturous, Sanctified Centuries. And finally, a band called Vultur, but without E. And this is in Italy or Latin or whatever, I don't even know. It didn't sound like Italian to me. Cultores, perdas, linna. Maybe it's in Italy. Fuck do I know. Anyhow, now let's do them in the order I prefer, worst to best. Actually, this is quite hard this time to putting them in order the way I like them the most, because they are quite close to one another in terms of quality. Which is, of course, good news because, like I said, there are no bad ones or mediocre ones this time. First, let's see about this Unholy Impurity, which is quite of an underground name. Well, that's why they are here on Underground Trio episode. And let's take a look at their stuff here. Sometimes these are quite stuck. So this is kind of the basic second wave black metal, not reinventing here anything, not being revolutionary in so many ways, not. Meaning this is very, very much the kind of a basic second wave, rather nicely executed black metal. You have the faster parts, you have the certain kind of intensity, but nothing here is going like, how to say, off the grid. Of the territory, of the field, meaning it's quite safe and sound in terms of black metal. Now, it might sound like, okay, what you're describing is quite boring, but in fact, I find this rather likable. The only thing what I find problematic with this kind of stuff is that it doesn't really, stand out from the other bands operating around the scene. Meaning that while this is totally cool to listen to and you don't find the actual complaints, like it's a somewhat rawish output, with the production and all, but nothing here is disturbing. Nothing here is like, okay, it sounds weak or it's not unfitting kind of a production. The point here is when you have the kind of a basic black metal, how you gonna really stand out from the rest of the stuff? I mean, there are thousands and thousands of albums operating around the same field. Some are worse, some are better. There are lots of bands which are indeed worse. So Unholy Impurity is, in that sense, in a very, very much like getting comparison with bands like, say, Horna. Obviously, it doesn't have the sex appeal like Horna, not coming from the Nordic countries, doesn't have that long history and all. So it's more like a new guy in the block, like, hey, I'm gonna do this second wave black metal the way it was meant to be, the way it's gonna sound, the way you fell in love with. But when you start comparing it to so many more legendary bands, older bands, the bands that actually kind of got that classic status, it's gonna pale in comparison. That's kind of inevitable. But that's not so much because the music would be bad. Actually, I would say this is a lot better than so many of those B or C class bands from the 90s, which were like, okay, you're getting the attention just because you're from Norway and Sweden. And in fact, these kind of albums could have like been in those asses back in the days easily. But nowadays it's different, because when you come to the scene in 2025, where the scene is saturated with thousands and thousands of releases from thousands and thousands bands, and you're gonna challenge a lot of them, and it's gonna be hard to convince you have something worthwhile talking to. So I'm gonna say here and repeat myself, it's definitely worth listening to. The songs are pretty alright. Nothing just is that memorable, so it's not gonna stand out like that. So yeah, it's worth a go, but a little bit too basic for its own good. A little bit better, but roughly operating around the same level is this other Italian band. so Sardinian black metal scene, Vultur, which is here. They have been around for quite some time. If I recall correctly, they're from 2005, so 20 years, not exactly a new band to the scene. However, like I said, it's harder, I guess, for a lot of Italian bands to come out something like convincing, something new, something challenging than if you were, say, from Norwegian scene. Even if Norwegian black metal hasn't been that great for a lot of years compared to what they did in the 90s, the stigma is right there. If you come from Mediterranean countries, you're automatically seen as some kind of a underdog, with maybe some Greek bands getting a little bit, accepted more easily. So in that sense, I kind of feel it's unfair, because bands like Vultur here, for example, they're doing just fine job. There's aggression, good production, somewhat melodics. So it's like everything here is doing the second wave black metal just nicely. Now with just better production than back in the early 90s. But when it comes to the songwriting, once again, nothing really here stands out. So all in all, this is much like its counterpart in Unholy Impurity. There are obviously, differences in details, quite a lot of it. But if you would just, see them, at the same show, same festival, back to back and all, and someone would ask you a week later, so which one was better? What are the songs like? And you would probably say, yeah, they're pretty basic, pretty good. Black metal bands coming from Sardinia, but that's about it. Now, will these bands make you a fan if you see them live? Hard to say for sure, but on album levels they are really that kind of a gray area, which is so many times being conquered that it's really hard to stand out unless you add some gimmicks, in which case it's gonna turn against them. I mean, by gimmicks I mean you add a layer of lots of female vocals, go overly symphonic, or do some kind of hipster things on it. So I'm saying both of these albums, both of these bands are definitely worth a go if you are into more traditional black metal that was already a thing more than 30 years ago. But don't expect anything revolutionary, once again. So pretty good albums, but somehow a little bit too basic. I mean, in terms of, conquering the world and all. Then, in my opinion, the best of the pile is Unhoped. This is a band that has been around for nearly 20 years now. I think it was 2007 when this was founded, and I heard the band for the first time around 2011. And it was more or less always thrash metal thing. Now, this new album, third one, it's definitely more death thrash than previously. I mean, there has been death metal elements with their thrash metal previously, so it's not like unheard of. But this time I think the focus is a little bit different. They do sound very heavy, and that's partially where these kind of a death metal element comes from. And they even call themselves death thrash violence, whereas on Metal Archives it's still listed as thrash metal. So, changes. This album was originally released in late 2024, but I guess this CD, which is self-financed by the way, came late to the party. I am assuming this came straight from the band, but no words were mentioned as far as I could see the envelope, so I don't know. But it seems like these guys decided to do self-financed CD eventually, and it turned out great. I think the non-glossy digipack is actually very good looking, and there is something old school ways in a death metal sense with this cover. Now, in terms of songwriting, there are lots of classic thrasher elements. You can even hear some kind of a punkiness, akin to early Slayer and all that stuff with certain riffs. So very simple but aggressive. Strong but kind of a too basic. When it comes to vocals, then again, it's between your typical thrash and death metal vocals. So not purely growly, but not exactly your typical thrash metal grunting or, shouting, whatever you want to call it. But they are quite good, so they fit the bill very well. After all, this is taking the best parts of thrash and death metal. However, much like the previous ones, the final layer that really separates the great from the good is once again missing. That is not to say that this album isn't good, because it's good. But is it great? I wouldn't call it so. For me, it's more like something magical is not there. Not just yet, anyway. Meaning, while the songs are very, very easy to enjoy, and I mean, I when I was focusing individual riffs, and I was thinking, okay, these are very, very solid riffs. Like, you could totally do a good album having a lot of these, but then you would also need some kind of a killer chorus parts or something. I mean, even the guitar solos are pretty fucking decent. So it's basically, you could just do a really, really good stuff with this kind of stuff. So what is missing? And I'm thinking, I don't know what is that magical ingredient. And I think if a lot of bands or a lot of artists knew what the magical component was, they would fucking add it everywhere. I mean, that's really what you want to do in order to kick some asses, kick down some doors, and conquer the world. So sometimes the magical difference, say with bands like Burzum and the followers that are doing atmospheric black metal, sometimes it's about individual riffs, individual parts in certain albums, certain songs, and so forth. So how does this get compared to Slayer? There are lots of similarities. This doesn't just have the best part which Slayer does. So it's not about vocals, it's not about production, and it's not about the basic riffs that go on with the lyrics. It's that magical ingredient, the component this one doesn't have, and some of the best albums have. But anyway, overall a good album, and that's why it's the best of the pile this time. So in case you want your death thrash, and even doesn't matter if you don't like that much death metal, even if you're a thrash metal head, give this one a go. So all these 3 bands have their links included in the description box. So give them a go, and I hope you like at least some of them. In my opinion, this was one of the better Underground 3 episodes for a while, given the quality of overall works. Maybe not masterpieces, but definitely worth giving a shot. Off you go and enjoy.